Hello and welcome back to Cargo Cafe. As always, I'm your host, Libby Hausman. I'm joined today by Kelly Adkins, the Senior Account Manager at Best Way International. Kelly, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you back. It's always great to have you in the office talking to some of our amazing guests.
Yeah. Well, Melissa's one of my favorite people out in the industry, and we've both been around a long time.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I was excited when
I was going to say,
she was with us.
Yeah, speaking of amazing guests, we have Melissa Miller here today, and she's going to be talking about USMCA. We're super excited. It's a really great topic, especially for right now, very timely. I feel like USMCA, at least for me, was one of those things that I learned about in school and then didn't think about again until I got a job in international trade. But being here at Best Way and all the opportunities I've had, it's very interesting, and there's no shortage of things to learn and talk about. So we're really excited. As I mentioned, we have Director at the World Trade Center of Kansas City, Melissa Miller, with us today. Melissa joined the World Trade Center in 2016, charged with assisting Kansas City regional businesses with their international trade needs. Melissa is responsible for overseeing the organization's various events and programs designed to fulfill this mission. Before joining the WTC of Kansas City, Melissa served as an international trade specialist for the Missouri Department of Agriculture, specializing in the promotion of livestock and genetics. During her time at the Department of Agriculture, she led numerous trade missions and represented the state of Missouri at various trade shows. Prior to that, she worked as a data analyst for Lincoln University of Jefferson City, where she was charged with maintaining and reporting university data on a local, state, and national level. Melissa is originally from Central Missouri and is an avid traveler. She attended Truman State University and Lincoln University of Jefferson City. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Agribusiness and a Master of Business Administration and Business Management. So without further ado, let's bring Melissa out.
Thanks, Libby, and thanks, Kelly. It's good to be here today.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. We're really excited. Really appreciate your time and think this is definitely a worthwhile topic and something that people are interested in right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, USMCA is definitely a very timely topic, especially for 2026.
Yeah, we wanted to really jump into the year and make sure that we had all of our bases covered. Speaking of 2026, there's another big event happening in 2026 in Kansas City. We're really excited for the World Cup to come this summer, and I think there was a big announcement this morning if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely will impact the international trade community. We found out that Kansas City is going to host 4 base camps, which we were expecting 2 to 3, but super exciting to get 4. So that'll be Algeria, Argentina, England, and the Netherlands. So, 3 really big soccer teams, not to discount Algeria, but it's going to be exciting to have not only the teams there, but visitors from those countries to come and watch them play.
Yeah, it's going to be a really exciting time for Kansas City and Missouri as a whole. So we're super excited about that.
Absolutely.
Congrats to everything you've contributed to that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And are working on still.
A very, very big project takes lots and lots of people. So yeah, definitely huge props to you for being a part of that. But we're not here to talk about the World Cup today. We are going to talk about USMCA. Maybe we'll talk more about the World Cup later down the line. I know it's something people are interested in as well. As we're going through asking Melissa some questions, if you, the listeners, have any questions at any time, feel free to drop a comment down below. We want to make sure we're talking about what you want to hear about and answering all of your questions. So at any time during the conversation, feel free to chime in and we'll make sure we get that taken care of for you. So let's get right into it. For those who maybe are not as familiar, what is USMCA and why was it created?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question. And I think as international trade professionals, we talk a lot in acronyms. So it's always good to spell it out. So if I ever start talking in acronyms at any time during this conversation, feel free to butt in and be like, what does that stand for?
Yes.
But USMCA is the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. So, USMCA stands for all 3 of those countries. That agreement replaced NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, on June 30th of 2020. You may also hear it referred to as NAFTA 2.0, New NAFTA. If you're dealing with Canadian counterparts, you might hear them refer to it as CUSMA, where Canada is the first in that lineup. Or if you're dealing with Mexican counterparts, you may hear it referred to as TMEC. So they start with the trade and then Mexico first. But no matter how you say it, it's still the same agreement. And that agreement was created to replace a modernized NAFTA while still keeping those core tenets of reducing tariffs and other non-trade barriers between our countries.
That's interesting. I didn't know it had so many different names. That's good to know.
I know.
Yeah, there are plenty of acronyms in this industry. I feel like 50% of my job is just asking people like, what does that stand for? Yeah, absolutely. So what are the key differences between USMCA and NAFTA?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, modernization was definitely a key difference between NAFTA and USMCA. So USMCA specifically included a new chapter on digital trade. So when you look back when NAFTA was first implemented in 1994, which seems like a super long time ago, the digital trade landscape completely different than it is today. You know, so we weren't talking about cybersecurity, AI, governance, digital scraping, digital trade in a way in 1994 that we are today, and how that impacts international trade. So that was definitely a modernization that was added into USMCA. And it's certainly a need to keep modernizing the document as not only technologies, but industries change and advance and adapt to new ways of doing business. The next key difference was the sunset clause. So USMCA is a 16-year lifespan subject to regular renewal review, which is a tongue twister. NAFTA had no sunset clause or no sunset provision added in. So during a review period for USMCA, a country, any one of the countries can enact the sunset clause to dissolve the agreement. They can just say, hey, we're out. We no longer want to be a part of this. That renewal period is every 6 years. So 2026 is a big year for USMCA because it's the first year for the renewal. And then lastly, when we talk about the key differences between USMCA and NAFTA, USMCA saw stricter labor, environmental, and rule of origin updates across key sectors. So the automotive was one of the big industries that we saw those key sector updates. So we saw increased regional value content, or RVC. You may hear it called RVC. That's regional value content. We saw that rise from 62.5% under NAFTA to 75% under USMCA for vehicles to qualify for that zero tariff. They had also introduced a labor value content, or an LVC. So it requires that 40 to 45% of auto parts must be made by workers earning at least $16 per hour, which was not the case under NAFTA. And then it also added a steel and aluminum sourcing mandate of 70%. So 70% of that steel and aluminum going into the automobile has to be sourced from within North America. Agriculture was another key sector where we saw updates. U.S. farmers were granted increased access to Canadian markets, specifically in dairy, poultry, and eggs. And then the textile industry, we really saw an implementation of stricter rules regarding those rules of origin and the origin of textiles and sourcing going back.
Interesting. So you touched on a little bit on the industries that are impacted, but in terms of like business size, who's impacted the most? Large corporations or the more small businesses?
Yeah, I'd say a short answer is both, just in slightly different ways. Larger corporations generally benefit from USMCA from that core trade flow. If you think of your Walmarts, your Coca-Cola's, Pepsi's, those larger organizations, they generally already have offices and supply chains in place across North America. So they're going to benefit because they've already got that pre-existing relationship. They're going to just capture a greater share of overall trade volume and investment. But one of the things, and I guess this is a key difference that I didn't mention earlier, but USMCA did make a deliberate effort to include specific advantages for SMEs. So they added a specific chapter into USMCA on tools and provisions to help SMEs take advantage of international trade across USMCA. So the SME chapter was kind of revolutionary. It marked the first ever chapter dedicated in a trade agreement anywhere in the world dedicated to SME support for a trade agreement. And then those provisions that I talked about. So one, it added provisions in there to cut red tape. So, an easing of procedures for lower value shipments. So under a certain threshold, so reduced paperwork, faster clearance, which is really great for small businesses. A lot of times they're not sending full container loads. It's just a pallet at a time. Those lower value shipments, it's always nice to have less paperwork to do. And then you saw increased de minimis thresholds for shipments to Canada and Mexico. So that's really great if you're a small seller on something like Etsy, getting a lot of your products out and across the borders with a greater de minimis threshold. And then the last kind of key update for SMEs would be an elimination of local presence requirements. So a lot of times you'll see countries require a business to have a foreign office, and USMCA did away with that for I shouldn't say all SMEs, most SMEs no longer have that local presence requirement that was removed to help ease trade for SMEs.
Yeah, that's really interesting that it was the first trade agreement to kind of include those provisions helping out small businesses. Since then, have we seen other trade agreements kind of adopt similar policies?
That is a really great question. I don't know.
Sorry, it's throwing that one on you.
I don't know off the top of my head, but that would be interesting if anybody's using it as a model.
Yeah.
Moving forward.
Yeah. So how would you say that USMCA has reshaped supply chains across North America?
Yeah, definitely in the way and some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, especially with those key sector updates, we're seeing increased nearshoring and reshoring so that those regional production and sourcing was incentivized through those RVC, those regional value content requirements, and the rules of origin requirements that were brought forth. So a lot of companies were shifting their supply chains, production lines to align with USMCA requirements. They wanted to take advantage of those zero tariffs. It just made sense for them to do that. Through this, it also led to a rise, or not a rise, I guess, a strengthening of Mexico as a manufacturing hub. So, nearshoring and reshoring, Mexico really saw a boom and a strengthening in their manufacturing hub. We also saw increased intra-regional trade. So industrial inputs and finished goods between the three countries certainly rose, again, because of those requirements that were to gain access to that preferential tariff. And then you saw significant growth in those manufacturing supply chains because of that, and then cross-border investment. So, companies wanting to not only manufacturing hubs, but distribution hubs to take advantage of that movement of goods. And then you saw some product localization rises or increases. So companies began investing more in regional infrastructure. So again, those distribution hubs, they wanted to take advantage of the regional infrastructure, inventory systems to support those more frequent localized shipments that have shorter lead times. So if you're not waiting for a shipment to come from Asia, if it's coming from Mexico, you've got a shorter lead time that allows you to move, inventory a lot quicker and be a lot more agile.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that on our end of the business too. The Mexico business has picked up dramatically, and we're moving multiple shipments daily. With the speed and all of that goes into that versus overseas for sure. We've seen those benefits.
When you're not waiting for time on the water. What's the difference? Certainly.
You kind of already hinted at the answer of this, but why is 2026 such a big year for USMCA?
I skipped ahead. So as I mentioned earlier, 2026 marks the first scheduled review of USMCA. So that's going to start on July 1st, 2026. I say start, that's going to start the conversations between, but all three countries have been preparing for that review talks and what they want to gain out of those review talks. So again, during this review process, there's an opportunity for them to renegotiate again, for what they want, certain chapters, like we saw with the dairy industry, if they wanted increased access. So kind of, it's going to depend on where each country is kind of coming from. They can also make updates and amendments to the agreement. So if something needs to be added in, if there needs to be, again, stricter requirements for certain industries, labor requirements, things like that. Or again, any country can choose to enact that sunset clause, which would see the deal end in 2036. So There's a couple ways it could go.
So if somebody does enact the sunset clause, it would be 2036 before that would be completed though? So it's not like it could happen in 26. They would just announce it. Okay.
Yeah, they'll still go through the 2036, and it'll just be like a slow kind of dismantling of that trade agreement. It won't abruptly end in 2026 where they're just like, and we're done.
Yeah. If businesses want to give their opinion on USMCA, should they reach out to you? What should they be doing?
Yeah, I mean, happy to have them reach out to us and funnel them to the appropriate places. Generally, and I'm going to get the governmental body wrong, but they'll do kind of an open call for discussion on USMCA, so whatever they want to put forth, there'll be open calls like that.
Right.
Or if you've got an international legal team in your back pocket, so if you know an international lawyer who's going to be working on this,
right,
it's always good to get them kind of in front of that as well, because they're going to have kind of a voice in that fight as well.
Well, and you bring consulates in to Kansas City often too, that it seems like that's kind of something that's usually touched upon, as feedback's always welcome. And I guess I didn't really understand how to get that feedback.
Yeah. There's a bunch of different avenues. And then, World Trade Center, Kansas City, I always forget to mention this. We're part of the KC Chamber. We're part of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. And with that, we also have a dedicated public policy team, and they set a federal agenda with international trade points in there. So we give feedback to them on what we want them to advocate and go forth and, lobby on our behalf for whatever policy recommendations for international trade. So it's always good to get it in front of us if we know this community has a specific agenda, or they're like, hey, this is what we want to see out of USMCA. We can forward that along. And then in general with lobbying, in any association that you're a part of, especially industrial associations, they're going to have a lobbying voice in DC. Where again, they're always great to get funnel that information up to.
So what types of changes or reviews should businesses be paying attention to right now?
So there's going to be a lot talked about. So I kind of I'll touch on a couple of key areas that I think will be of most benefit to the business community to kind of keep an eye on or worth paying attention to. But again, depending on which industry you're in, there may be some stuff that I'm just not going to touch on. So I'm going to try to generalize this as much as possible. But definitely digital trade and technology. Again, we talked about that NAFTA to USMCA, that 94 to 2020 and that modernization. But we expect to see updates on rules for cross-border data flow, what that looks like. AI governance, again, that's getting a lot of talk about how do you deal with AI and what does that mean between countries. Cybersecurity is certainly going to be a big topic, and then data localization. So what that looks like and how you keep data. Specifically in the agriculture industry as it relates to digital trade and technology, I expect a very robust discussion on right to repair. Again, my background's in agriculture, so I keep up to date on that, but not everybody may know, but I know that was a big kind of across border with right to repair and whether or not farmers have the right to repair their own vehicles, or
I was going to have to ask for more details.
Or if you have to require the John Deere dealership to do it.
Gotcha. It makes sense. Yeah.
So as the software in those agriculture, equipment advances, what does that look like? So I expect there's going to be a big discussion on that, especially as it relates to agriculture. Labor and environment standards are going to be another deep topic that I think you're going to see a call for stricter enforcement of labor rights, especially around collective bargaining, minimum wages. What does that look like? If you've got offices or manufacturing facilities in multiple locations, or if you're buying from somebody in a location that doesn't have the same labor rights and standards that we have here. So I think there's going to be stricter enforcement called for labor rights. I think you're going to see a stronger sustainability measures that are going to be put in place. Again, that's, all of this is going to impact manufacturing costs if those things are going to be implemented, and like how severe those are going to be. So again, just something to kind of keep an eye on. And then rules of origin enforcement, I expect them to have a heavy focus on the effectiveness of the tightened rules of origin requirements. So we did see USMCA tighten rules of origin requirements. So we're going to see, like, has it been effective in the way that we want it to be effective? There's been some concerns raised over the past 6 years since implementation about loopholes, circumvention, increased compliance burdens, especially with the supply chain shifting from Asia to more of the Mexico. Companies have been trying to get around, China will send those products directly to Mexico to try to start those higher tariff rates. So, how do we make sure we're being compliant? How do we track that? And then the impact, or this is going to impact, of course, supply chains, compliance, record keeping, any reporting that companies are going to have to do. So certainly something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I think the other thing to again, keep an eye on or focus on is going to be intellectual property standards and enforcement. So we anticipate the U.S. to push for better patent adjustments, regulatory data protection, enforcement against piracy and counterfeiting, and then just general updates to IP protection against digital trade. So certainly not all encompassing of what they're going to be discussing in USMCA, but I think just generally something for companies to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of information, and I feel like we can even see it tightening up some. Like we get asked more questions on some cross-border moves and things like that. What risks do you think companies face if they wait too long to pay attention to these changes or evaluate their processes?
I think like with most things, your company could be just left scrambling with new updates or when those new updates are put into action. So if you wait too long, you might just be scrambling a little bit, behind the eight ball. So, it's going to cost you a significant amount of time and money to course correct from that. You may experience compliance failures, which leads to fines or other penalties, which is not great. Nobody ever wants that. Or you may be putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage. So if your competitors are already preparing for this, if they're doing this faster than you are, that's going to put you at a significant disadvantage.
I feel like this is a tricky question because things are changing so fast, but how can you start future-proofing your trade strategies?
Yeah, actually, really quick. Sorry, Kelly, I'm going to stop you. Before we get into that, we had a great audience question from Ruth. She was informed that there were major changes to warranty or free charge order items are going to be handled in Mexico. Can you please help clarify what this entails and the proper way that these should be handled moving forward?
That was a good question. I don't know that I have full details on that, but I can certainly try. That may be I'll have to get back to you question.
Yeah, totally fine.
Yeah, just because there's so much out there. But
I think we might have some contacts in Mexico that could help us on that
side. Yeah, I was going to say there's definitely a lot of contacts, and I can ask the folks on my end. And we are talking with the Mexican consulate currently about a USMCA focused event. So the Mexican consulate does have an office here in Kansas City, and we're talking about putting on a USMCA event. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of details on that just yet, but we can definitely ask about the warranty issues as it relates to Mexico. I know just in generally that US and Canada have been really pushing to bring Mexico up to more of the standards that are seen in the US and Canada. So it wouldn't surprise me that, they're trying to align what Mexico's doing in terms of warranties and things like that with whatever the standards are in the US and Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great question, Ruth. Thank you. And I know, we didn't necessarily answer 100%, but Kelly will get back to you. Don't worry. Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry to interrupt, Kelly. You were asking.
I had asked what I think is a super tricky question on how do you future-proof your trade strategies now?
Yeah.
I feel like that's the hardest one.
Yeah, especially in 2026.
I guess nobody's really got a crystal ball to look into the future, or, if I did, I'd be doing a lot better now. But one of the things that I think companies should definitely be doing if you're not already doing it now, start. So perform an audit on your international trade procedures. Identify your risk areas and how they can be fixed. So, are you reliant on a single supplier? What happens if that supplier is no longer in business or is no longer cost effective, like we saw with the tariffs? Do you have a contingency plan in place if something like that happens overnight? If you're sourcing from Mexico, ensure you're, compliant with USMCA's labor laws, like we said earlier. You want to make sure that you have those things in place, that you're being compliant across the board, identifying those risk areas and kind of gap areas that you have. The second thing I would say is work smarter, not harder. So implement digital tools where you can. And I don't say, you don't have to spend a lot of money to implement some digital tools that can help with just, regular everyday things like compliance tasks, record keeping, data analysis, things that'll help you make faster and more informed decisions. And Kelly, you alluded to this earlier. CBP is starting to ask, or Customs and Border Protection. I almost did it. I almost just threw out.
I knew that one. I knew that one.
Yeah. So Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, is going to start. We're seeing increased requests from them on asking for more detailed data, especially as it relates to rules of origin. They're wanting to know deeper into supply chains on those things. So that's adding those digital tools is going to make it faster and easier for you to prepare for those requests. And then the last thing that I would say is be prepared to defend yourself. And that sounds very ominous, but as you're building out those internal strategies and processes, you want to keep in mind that you could be audited at any time. Customs could flag something and suddenly you're under an audit. So you want to be sure that, as you're looking at your internal processes and strategies as it relates to your supply chain, that you're building legally defensible positions for the origin, the valuation, and the classification of your products and components in your supply chain all the way through. So if you're ever audited, you are in a good place. You have all of these processes in place. You have documentation. You have data to ensure that you've been compliant. And I believe it's still the case that CBP recommends that you keep data back for 5 years on all of your shipments. So it's definitely record keeping. And again, work smarter, not harder. Don't make this super hard for yourself.
Not to toot our side of the horn, but that's where your freight forwarder can come in handy too, as far as keeping records and helping. And that's where, if you have just a few freight forwarders you work with, that process is probably easier than if you are shipping on like an Ex-Works type of situation where you're always dealing with a different freight forwarder that your customer hires or whatever. That can get confusing. So I wanted to say that, but also what I wanted to touch on, the finding more than one vendor, that has seemed huge here lately, that if you have more than one resource to buy your goods, and I don't think a lot of people know that you can help vet them. So do you want to do a little plug there on what you guys can do?
Yeah, that's definitely an area where a World Trade Center can help. So we're one of the few trade service organizations that can help with importation needs, and supplier searches have definitely been one of those. Coming out of COVID, and definitely with the tariff implementations that we've seen over the last year and a half, we've fielded a lot of questions of like, hey, it's no longer tenable for us to source from Asia. Who else you got? So we've been able to work with our counterparts across the World Trade Centers Association network. So there's like 319 of us at any given moment.
Oh, wow.
We've got quite a few in Mexico and Canada, where we've been able to go like, hey, we've got somebody looking to move their supply chain closer to home. Do you have somebody that can produce XYZ in your market? And they'll reach out to their business community. And a lot of times it ends pretty successfully. So
yeah, because I would just think, well, I've witnessed it from the outside. It's a daunting task to add on another vendor. So if they've got somebody like you backing them up to at least get something, that would be super helpful.
Yeah. And that's a good thing about as you mentioned, with the WTCA network, anybody that we're connecting with another World Trade Center, it's somebody that we've fully vetted, that we know those businesses. So it's not just them looking up and, a Google search.
Yeah.
I think this company can do it.
Yeah, that's such a good answer and a good kind of natural plug there. Sounds like you just have to have Best Way and the World Trade Center in your corner, and you'll be fine.
Right? All good.
Yeah. So, kind of piggybacking off of that compliance discussion, what are the most common compliance mistakes that you see companies making specific to USMCA?
Yeah. Documentation is a big one. So, customs will flag your shipments if you're missing a document that they want you to have, if your documents don't match. So if you're missing information on the documents, if they're invalid signatures or stamps, if you don't have the correct ones, or just failing to keep your records. So, customs wants to see that those documents are matching across everything. So if you're using kilograms on one document, you better use kilograms all the way across. Or if, that's one thing that we've seen, like net weight, and people who use net weight and then they'll switch to like something else into another document. We're like, you need to have it the same across the board.
Yeah.
This is going to be like, wait a minute. They're not out there to do math. They want to see everything good across the board. Yeah. Product classification is another area where people can get tripped up. They're either using a generic code or an incorrect product classification code. So, customs uses those product codes to determine tariff rates, and they are vigilant. They are making sure that, folks are being compliant. Again, back to the earlier conversation, they're really hammering down and they're being a lot more strict on the vigilance of those classification codes as it relates to tariff rates. And then rules of origin, for sure, that's another area where people can get tripped up. So incorrectly declaring your rule of origin. So if you don't meet the criteria to be in that rule of origin requirement, just due to, again, a misunderstanding of your product codes, your HTS codes, can lead to some serious ramifications, or relying solely on your supplier data. And I cannot stress this enough. Please, for the love, always double check the data provided by your supplier is correct. Don't take them at face value. Do not rely on them as a sole source of verification. Everybody's fallible. We all make mistakes. They may have made a mistake in what the data that they're presenting to you. There may have been a recent legal ruling established that what the information they gave you is no longer valid. Or they could just be a bad actor. They may not have your best interests at heart. They're trying to get a lower tariff rate, or they're trying to circumvent a rule of origin. So please always do your due diligence. I cannot stress that enough.
That's what we even will catch some stuff sometimes, because we get to know our customers and what their products are. And if somebody in ops sees an HTS code that doesn't, they're like, are you sure this one's right? And we'll have to do some double checking. But everything you just mentioned too is different information that goes on a commercial invoice than like a domestic move. And I think people, and not so much lately, but especially when I first got started with this forever ago, everybody treated Mexico and Canada as a domestic type move, and people are using domestic invoices and things like that. But your documentation is entirely different for USMCA, and everything you just said is why. So just wanted to put an exclamation point on that one.
That's a great call out. You mentioned a couple times rules of origin. Can you explain that in kind of like really simple terms and why they're so critical?
Yeah, I will do my best. So rules of origin, the best way I can describe it. So they're the criteria that's used to determine the source of a product. So not just where it's manufactured, where it's sourced from. And it's essentially just tracing the components back to their ultimate source. So, the shirt that you wear, not where it was manufactured, but where the cotton or the thread that's in that shirt, where that was grown. So they want to track it all the way back to its original source material. It's critical, again, I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. So customs takes those rules of origin into account when they're determining those tariff rates, whether you're eligible for preferential treatment under those tariff rates, but then also like trade compliance with laws. And then, talking about textiles, a good example of that is the UFLPA, or the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act. So that's a U.S. law that prohibits goods that are made with forced labor from China's, and I'm going to get this wrong, it's the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. in China.
I'll believe
Uh,
you.
I know, I was like, I was probably butchering that pronunciation, but it's the XUAR region in China. So essentially, U.S. and Customs and Border Protection, they enforce it by detaining any imports by detaining imports that could possibly come from that particular region and requiring importers to provide clear and convincing evidence that their goods are free from forced labor. So it's just an example of where rules of origin are used to enforce trade compliance from a legal ruling. But
Okay, yeah, that helps, and it makes a lot of sense. You know, it's not just where was the product made; it's where were all the parts to make the product,
Yeah.
all the different components.
It kind of goes back to what you said too, where people try and circumvent it by, okay, well, your Mexican supplier just bought the goods from China, and that needs to be tracked back too.
Yeah, and you talk about shifting supply chains. We've seen a lot of people try to get around that by they're like, oh, but I'm buying it from Vietnam. I'm not buying it from China. And if you go back and look where Vietnam's buying it from, they're buying it from China. They're not manufacturing, like they're not sourcing it in Vietnam. They could actually be buying it from China and getting them in. So it's just, yeah, it's always something. Again, it goes back to record keeping and like
a lot of due diligence and keeping your ducks in a row.
Right.
Yeah. So we've talked about several different types of documentation. Are there any specific documents that you recommend companies regularly review in order to stay compliant?
Yeah. Yeah, your transactional documentation. So anything, again, required by customs to move a shipment across the border. Those are going to be things like Kelly mentioned them, your commercial invoices, your bills of lading, airway bills, packing lists, certificates of origin. Basically any document the customers requires to move a shipment across the border. It's definitely something to be diligent about and keep an eye on for compliance. We mentioned it earlier, you want to ensure accuracy and conformity across those documents. Customs, again, is not going to do math. They want to make sure that everything's straight across the board.
Yeah.
And again, they use those documents to track the product and shipment for ROOs, those rules of origin. They use it to track trade compliance and even for insurance purposes. So, if you've got a ship at sea and they run into bad weather and they've got to jettison a container and it's your container, that's how they track it back to make sure that you're getting your insurance paid out. Hopefully you have insurance. I don't know. Maybe you don't. Maybe that should be the next topic of conversation.
Right.
Insurance, but
We'll have to hear that.
Yes, we have done some insurance conversations, but
right. Yeah, that is definitely when we talk to new businesses and we're like, do you have insurance? And they're like, insurance. And we're like, please.
You want it. Yeah.
And some other things that I'll just mention real quickly that I guess are less documentation per se, but do a regular review, as you're auditing your processes. Look to see if you need export licenses or permits for, specific products. Things could change. Again, if you are doing significant change to a product that now qualifies to have a permit, or requires an export license in this area, or if there was a change in a regulatory code that could change some things around or shift some things, always something to keep an eye on. If you need compliance certification, so again, if there's changes in product specific safety or quality standards that now requires you to have a new certification, so like a certificate of manufacturing, free sale, something like that. And then, we talked about bad actors before. Again, less documentation, but I also suggest doing a regular review of your buyers and suppliers to make sure that they're not on a sanctions or embargoes list. Those are colloquially known as no-no lists. You do not want to be caught doing business with anybody on those lists. It does not end well. So just, good things to keep up to date on.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about how to make sure that you stay compliant. Really quick, don't want to get too far into scare tactics, but what are some potential consequences of being non-compliant?
Yeah. Non-compliance is definitely not an oops, my bad situation where you might get off with a warning. They definitely take noncompliance very seriously. A few of the more, I guess, common consequences that you could face are monetary penalties, steep fines. So you may see a repayment of duties required plus interest. So not just the duties that you might have missed, but they'll charge you interest on top of that. You could lose your duty-free treatment if the claim is invalid. You could see supply chain disruption if your shipments are getting stopped at the border, so that's going to cause you increased delays on getting your product from point A to point B. It's definitely going to increase your costs because now you're having to hold that product at a location. If you're a repeat offender or if the original offense is egregious enough, you could see a denial of entry of goods, so they just customs will refuse to take those products.
Oh, wow.
You could see increased scrutiny on future shipments, which is not great. You never want to be under customs thumb every time your shipment gets by the border now. You could see forced remediation, and that's more common with labor noncompliance. So you might have to just make some remediation. And then you could, in some severe cases, see your export license completely revoked. And yeah, like you said, we don't want to fear monger, right? No fear mongering, but
ignorance is not a defense, right?
Like, yes. And it's definitely why we recommend.
Well, if I just put my head in the sand and I didn't know, but they don't really like that either.
Yeah,
no.
It's important to know what's out there, but also there's ways to avoid that by staying compliant and being in touch with all your vendors and suppliers and partners. Make sure everybody, multiple eyes on everything, never hurts.
So along those lines, we'll let you give a little bit more plug on what the World Trade Center can do to support companies that are new to international trade. What else?
No, absolutely. So if you're not familiar with World Trade Centers, I think I mentioned it earlier, there's like 319 of us around the world. We're in most major metropolitan areas. And World Trade Centers provide a variety of trade services that are helpful in navigating agreements. The most common would be business consultations. So we're here to help companies, again, navigate those. We'll sit down with you, assess where you're at, where you want to be, how we can help get you there. We provide recommendations. So if you're looking for a freight forwarder, we know some people. If you need recommendations on a legal attorney to help, we've got, recommendations in those areas. So we're able to refer people to experts in areas where we might not be the sole source of information. We do help with export documentation. So as a World Trade Center, also attached to a chamber, we do process certificates of origin. So that's something that we do. Some of the other World Trade Centers will do that as well. We talked about supplier sourcing earlier. That's been certainly a big, for trade agreements, helping companies find other suppliers and buyers for their goods and services. And then just those general connections, like we mentioned, the Mexican consulate, we work very, very closely with the Mexican and Canadian consulates, our WTC counterparts in those countries, and then other trade service providers. There's a very tight-knit group of people across the Kansas City metro area that are trade service providers, and we have really great relationships with them. And I will give a plug to them because, if we're not the end all, if we can't necessarily help you, chances are somebody else in that network is going to be able to. So if you get to one of us, you get to all of us. And I love that about Kansas City.
Yeah, I do encourage people to go to your events because it does make all of this feel much more manageable, smaller. You're meeting people face to face and you're finding out about all the resources that are available to you. So Export Concierge is another one.
Yes.
Which I didn't hear you name, but I know I've been involved helping you with some of that too. That is a super cool program for, again, companies that are wanting to get an international business. You guys help them come up with a business plan, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if we've got time to talk about it.
So we have a couple minutes.
We can talk about whatever we want.
But yeah, between the Export Concierge and then our Heartland Export Accelerator, we definitely have, and again, with the educational events and some of the other services that we provide, definitely there to help small businesses enter international trade. And the Export Accelerator, we're very proud of that. Mm-hmm. That has seen a lot of success, and it's essentially helping companies, like Kelly said, build out an export plan. So when we talk to some of the other trade service providers in the area, we found you could give them, small businesses, a template on an export plan, and some of them who were very proactive would fill it out and some wouldn't, and then they'd have questions, and there was really nobody to take them across the end line. Like there's certainly people there to help them with components of that, but nobody was actively like taking them through the process and getting them across the finish line. So very, very proud of that. We've seen a lot of success stories come out of the Export Accelerator program. Most recently, I hope they don't mind me mentioning this. We had DEF CON here on the Missouri side. They sell underground bunkers, and they were able to complete an overseas sale.
We're helping them move that. So, yep. It's been fun to watch their success for sure. So they just happened to find a great market for them overseas, and luckily they knew to go to you to help with a plan. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, Melissa. Thank you so much for coming on and being willing to talk to us, and for all the great work you do at the World Trade Center. I'll send a follow-up email giving some additional information and letting you know how to contact Melissa if you need any help with any USMCA or really international trade and beyond. She's going to be a great resource. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show. For everyone who watched, thank you. I'll be in touch, and we'll be back next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
Thanks, Melissa. Good to see you.
There we go.